wake of the release of the first teaser trailer for the live-action How to Train Your Dragon film, I've been thinking a lot more about the franchise as a whole. I came rather late to the party for the overall release of the trilogy. I never saw the first two in theaters and only got around to seeing them both around 2015 or 2016. Like the fool that I was in my angsty teen, animations cringe and for kids phase. How embarrassing for me. However, despite me coming late to the party, there was still a huge gap between releases, with the third film in the trilogy coming out 5 years after the second. So there was plenty of time for me to engage in the fandom, and I did end up watching all of the shows and whatnot. To tell you the truth, I ended up well and truly falling in love with the franchise in those years. The first two films are something truly special, crafting a world that's beloved even now more than a decade on, grossing decently well by DreamWorks standards, and creating a deeply loyal and passionate fan base. Hell, even the made-for-TV/streaming shows are really good. They extended the lore and the story, and they fleshed out the characters and their relationships and dynamics. All in all, a very successful franchise, and as far as the first two films are concerned, this is largely uncontested. I think you can imagine that by the time they were going to release How to Train Your Dragon 3: The Hidden World, the hype for it was off the charts. For me, I was finally getting to see one of these films in the cinema after all of these years. I was excited, and even though it was a bit of a melancholy feeling considering the franchise was openly stated to be coming to an end, I was hyped to see it go out with a bang. And so I think it's a bit of a shame overall that I'm rather mixed on this movie. Well, that's how I initially felt. Recently, since I've been in such a How to Train Your Dragon mood, I've been perusing various different social media platforms to gauge discussion and see what the fans have been thinking about these days. I'm not exactly sure whether this is a regular occurrence, but at least recently there's been a lot of debate over whether The Hidden World was a mistake, a massive blunder, a franchise ruiner, and just the worst way to end things in general. Now, I made a video on this about 2 years ago, and I went back and took a quick look at it, and I don't think I was particularly all that in-depth about the movie. I was only basing it off memory from seeing the film 3 years prior to that, and we all know how memory can warp your thoughts on a movie. My changed mind on Toy Story 4 is living proof of this. So today I thought I'd rewatch The Hidden World and offer my thoughts onto whether it's truly the abysmal threequel that everyone keeps saying it is. Before I do all that though, I'll just quickly state my initial thoughts on the film compared to the fandom before having rewatched it so that way I can know my basis and see whether I was wrong at all in my judgment. I'm not one of those people that think it's a complete disgrace to the franchise and that it ruined How to Train Your Dragon forever. And there are a lot of people that think things like this. That it completely missed the boat in regards to what a film in this series was meant to be and didn't wrap it up in a satisfying way. I don't think I'd go that far by any means. At the same time though, of the 3 movies in the trilogy, this would be the one that I never really had a desire to rewatch. The other 2, always keen, but this one left me with a massive meh feeling. Just nothing special. For a normal film, that would be fine. Some things are just average by nature, and that's okay. For the final film in an outstanding franchise though, it is a bit sad. That's not to say I think it's terrible though. From memory, there is a lot to enjoy. And I don't think DreamWorks would have been disappointed with how it turned out either. Just quickly, if you look at the stats alone, I think it's clear the film was an overwhelming success for the studio overall. The franchise has never been a huge money spinner, but it's always been consistently successful. The first film grossed $494 million off of $165 million. The second film did a fair bit better, grossing $621 million off of $145 million, whilst the third film grossed $529 million off $129 million. Not too shabby at all. On top of that, they did well overall if you look at the reviews. The first film had a 99% critical score and a 91% audience score. The second film, a 92% and a 90%. Whilst the third film, a 90% and an 87%. So I think you'd be forgiven for saying that all of them were clearly good by all metrics you could measure a film by. That whilst the third film is perhaps the least good, it's still a really good movie. With all that out of the way though, I best get started and run through the plot of the third movie, and then give my overall thoughts. See if my opinions changed, and see if the social media rhetoric is correct. The story starts off with Hiccup and the gang raiding a ship filled with captive dragons. They free them, but the process isn't exactly smooth sailing. The dragons are brought back to Berk, where the community is inundated with many, many dragons. So much so that a tiny accident brings down a whole section of the island's construction. Gobber continuously warns Hiccup that bringing back so many dragons is probably a bad idea, but this advice rubs Hiccup the wrong way. We have a side plot introduced about hesitancy over Hiccup and Astrid getting married. Hiccup reflects on stories told by Stoic of a far-off home of dragons where no humans could ever reach or find. Hiccup's solution to their overpopulation of dragons is to simply move Berk there, so they can continue rescuing dragons from poachers and have a safe haven where they can live. This gets significant pushback initially, until a villain's introduced. This villain goes by the name of Grimmel, and he's hired by the targets of Hiccup's raids, hoping the Hunter of Night Furies could capture Toothless and bring him to them so they can use his alpha role to protect their shipments and dragons. Grimmel accepts and surprises Hiccup, burning down his house and ominously threatening him. Hiccup thinks this is too much and that they need to move Berk to the hidden world, so off they go. However, they can't travel particularly far, so they stop off at another island and make camp. Here's where Toothless bonds with a light fury used by Grimmel to create a weakness for Toothless and make him easier to catch. This dragon in particular does not like humans, which is saying something, as every dragon we meet until this point almost blindly accepts the dragon whisperer Hiccup. Despite a rocky start, Toothless and the light fury bond, and Hiccup creates a tail fin that Toothless can use to fly independently, so that way he can bond with the light fury without him. Toothless leaves, and the light fury leads him to the hidden world. Meanwhile, Hiccup's mum Valka's been scouting around the area and finds Grimmel's army. Since Grimmel had also previously laid traps to threaten Toothless, Hiccup decides to bring the fight to him and capture him. Things don't go to plan though, and they flee, but unfortunately Roughnut gets captured. At a loss about what to do, and with Toothless not having returned, Hiccup and Astrid go to find him. They reach the hidden world and find Toothless having become the alpha of all dragons, having a full-on Lion King / Pride Rock moment with the Light Fury. Hiccup and Astrid get spotted by some random dragon and nearly get killed, only for Toothless to save them and bring Hiccup back to the new island. Feeling that the Vikings wouldn't belong in this dragon utopia, Hiccup prepares to let Toothless go, until it's revealed the Light Fury has followed them. In the midst of all of this, Roughnut returns, having been let go by Grimmel, completely unaware that he's followed her right to their island. Grimmel arrives and immediately captures Toothless and the Light Fury, with all the other Berkian dragons following because Toothless is the alpha. Grimmel betrays the other dragon warlords and states he's going to finish Toothless off in order to completely wipe out the Night Furies. Never fear though, because Hiccup and the gang arrive and free the dragons. Hiccup attempts to free Toothless, only for Grimmel to drug him and cause him to fall from the sky. So then Hiccup frees the Light Fury and sacrifices himself and Grimmel, the Light Fury saving Toothless and then coming back to save Hiccup, leaving Grimmel to die. Hiccup says an emotional goodbye to Toothless and lets him go, with all the other Berkian dragons following him to the hidden world. Hiccup and Astrid get married, we have a time skip, they have a couple of kids, and they revisit Toothless going for a joyride into the sunset. The end. This is a lot to be getting on with. So I suppose I'll quickly address the other two elements in the room before I get really bogged down in the narrative. The audio and the visuals. Stunning and excellent in both respects. The animation's gorgeous, by far the best of the trilogy. Have you seen everybody's hair? And the setting? My god, the colour's amazing, and it's a travesty how far the Hidden World's fallen when you come to the dreaded Nine Realms TV show. That one should be classified as a crime against humanity. The soundtrack? What can I say? It's most likely John Powell's best work, and rewatching it, I was almost moved to tears in the goodbye and reunion scenes with Toothless. Whatever I've said about the movie previously, I've always returned to that scene on YouTube because it's just so good. Wouldn't be nearly as emotional without him. Okay, so with all of that out of the way, we can get into the nitty-gritty of the story. I'll be honest, after watching it, I came away from it a lot more positive than I was expecting. This feels like a Toy Story 4 moment all over again for me. I won't deny the movie has some issues compared to the first two, but I'll get to those in a little bit. First things first, I think we want to talk about the positives because I do think a film like this gets a lot of negative discourse, and I need to break that down because I've been guilty of it too. There are multiple storylines that occur in this film that I think are a bit overlooked and need a bit more love. First of all, the reliance on dragons and how that's negatively impacted the Viking society, particularly when it comes to the leads. We see early on how the characters have become more individualistic and focus solely on their dragons than being a team and a cohesive unit. It's not until they're without their dragons that they can fully begin to appreciate each other and work together again. Which is surprising initially, but not once you consider the context of the first movies. I realize the TV shows are a whole different kettle of fish, but I'm not really using that as a basis just because so much goes on in them, and I don't view them as really impacting the overall story in the films. In the first movie, everyone's pretty much in the team except for Hiccup. Yes, they argue and banter, but there's also a lot of camaraderie surrounding the Vikings and wanting to beat up the dragons. Once Hiccup joins the team with the dragons, it gives the gang a whole new power level and a deference to Hiccup because he's the almighty dragon whisperer. They're cool and they're powerful because of the dragons. And this is very much needed when it comes to the second film because they're facing such an enormous threat that could take away their utopia. We have Drago and his immensely powerful dragon who'd previously murdered other Viking chiefs and wants to control all dragons and make them his powerful soldiers. The gang are captured and their dragons are taken away due to the Alpha at the time, but this is largely a fight between Hiccup and Drago, especially after he makes Toothless kill Stoic. The stakes are not the same, and they haven't got too cushy in their lives like they have in the third one with their endless pet dragons. It's a solid subsection of the story, and I appreciated that development. You also have the impact of Stoic still being felt in this movie, or the lack of Stoic rather. He made an impact on Hiccup, and he's still guiding his choices and decisions. I enjoyed that a lot. On top of that, initially I thought that Hiccup and Astrid's hesitancy to get married was a little bit weird, but as I rewatched it, there was this moment where Hiccup seems keen but is kind of rebuffed by Astrid, and I thought that was good. But I definitely have more to say about this, as I don't view their relationship to be weird about that type of thing, but that's for the negative section, so we'll leave that for now. I enjoyed the character arc of Hiccup realizing that he's worthy of respect and being chief of Berk. Throughout this whole movie, there's this undercurrent of doubt by the other Vikings as to whether the choices he's making are the right ones. What's interesting about this is that once he commits to a decision with confidence, the Vikings don't actually really question it. Like at the end when he lets the dragons go free. And this is kind of represented by Tough Nut's blind support for Hiccup, which is used as a gag at first, but actually eventually rouses the rest of the community to support him. Similarly, you have Astrid. Everyone views her as a Chad and listens what she has to say. And a lot of that has to do with her self-confidence. And you see Hiccup's self-esteem wane as Toothless doesn't depend on him anymore. I liked this whole idea that the only reason he believes he's worthy and is actually good at things is because he was merciful to an animal, a really powerful animal, and that now he's experiencing imposter syndrome after his dad's died, and he no longer has access to that powerful animal anymore. I thought it was really well thought out and powerful. I'll also say that as depressing as it is, the dragons leaving was definitely the right decision in story. I was kind of shocked that this is such a controversial take amongst the fandom in general, but I tend to boil that down to nostalgia, honestly. I was smack bam in the middle of being a teenager when the first film released, so that, on top of watching the films once I was out of my cringe, angst-lord phase, I could see the writing was on the wall. I knew going into this film that it was going to be the end of the saga, and that had been stated publicly. There was also this whole idea in my eyes from the previous films that they had dragons, and how could this world continue to develop and mature whilst they still depended on them? I realize it's an alternate fictitious universe, but it was also made to feel like it was in the real world, if that makes sense. I don't know, just with the whole codependency between Hiccup and Toothless, it felt like the obvious choice to separate them, so they could both grow, become adults, become true leaders. And I think they got that ending right. And I like the idea that he still visits one day in the future when they're both matured and they get to see one another again. It's really touching. But they also get to keep the dragons safe, and it lets them fade into myth and legend. It makes a lot of sense, and it makes the whole world feel really real and is kind of sweet, especially for kids, I think. Okay, so with all those positives out of the way, of which there are quite a few, I want to delve into some of the negatives, of which there are also quite a few. I'll start small and then I'll build, I think. First of all, Volker. I've done a video previously where I've criticised her parenting decisions, and I stand by that honestly. She's a bit dodgy, not gonna lie. This isn't really about that though. She doesn't really do anything wrong in this movie. She offers sage advice and support not only to Hiccup, but in particular to Astrid. She recognises the partnership between Astrid and Hiccup's incredibly important and supports that, putting pieces together indirectly. In fact, she even acknowledges that Hiccup most likely has a complex due to her own failings, and the impact that that had on Stoic, which was then passed down. These are all good things, but, and there is a big but, the hole left by Stoic in the story needed to be filled. But it was left in the open with her popping in every half hour or so for 5 seconds before leaving again. I realise Hiccup needed to be more independent, and we do have some Stoic flashbacks which do help. And you might even say that, well, he has Gobber to fill that role, but Gobber's always filled that role. The fact of the matter is that they made such a big deal out of bringing his mother into the fold in the second movie, but they never capitalise on that. Here was a parent that was much more like him in spirit, and I think it's good she respected his boundaries or whatever because she wasn't around to parent him like Stoic was. But I think she needed to play a bigger role in the movie than just being a joke piece of Snotlout's affections. They neglected her, and it's a gaping hole that's obvious every time you watch it. She doesn't need to be commandeering, but she needs to offer more of an understanding of Hiccup than she did from her own personal experience. The second issue, which I'll touch on briefly, is the hesitancy of Hiccup and Astrid getting married. Now, I've got no problem with some early 20-year-olds not feeling ready for marriage or kids or whatever, but it is a little weird here. I mean, what difference is marriage going to make to these two people? Hiccup's already the chief. They're already running Viking society together. Ooh, they'll live in the same house? I feel like they're pretty close already, and they're already there maturity-wise. That's why I was glad when I saw the Hiccup was like, oh yeah, that's so crazy, sarcastically. Relationship-wise, it just felt like they were doing a small version of the drama for the sake of drama arc, where it wasn't needed at all. You could take away that whole storyline and just have them marry in the end, and nothing would change. Except there would be less Tough Nut, which I feel like could be both a positive or a negative depending on your mood when you watched it. I found him very funny when I was watching it most recently, but I also feel like he could get tired really quick for some people. So either way, I'm glad they didn't break them up or do something stupid like that, but this storyline itself wasn't really necessary. They're the most stable animated relationship I've seen. Let's keep them that way. The third is a big boy, Grimmel. Okay, I have a few problems with Grimmel, and whilst I always did, I feel as though my critiques have slightly changed on him. I found new issues and would slightly amend my previous ones. Dude's boring. He has no charisma. Against Drago, the immensely terrifying, you have this weedy soy boy who thinks he's the shit and he's just some weird guy in class that you avoid that kind of smells and rants about Andrew Tate. That's his vibe. The idea that he's a parallel to Hiccup is incredibly insulting, quite frankly. Apart from the fact that Hiccup wasn't actually scared to kill Toothless, he was just innately good and has love in his heart and that's why he didn't kill him, I also don't think that if Hiccup did kill a dragon, or if that Toothless had been killed by the fall, he wouldn't have turned into this loser. This man's a psycho, an actual psychopath. There are many dragon hunters we've seen on screen, and none of them, apart from Drago and Grimmel, seem particularly evil. Misguided, yes. Definitely a bit of an asshole, yes. But I want to control/kill all the dragons? I don't think so. Hiccup, whilst proactive, hasn't rescued every single dragon in existence. Grimmel, he has bothered to kill every Night Fury, apart from Toothless. They have different drives. And the whole takedown of Toothless wasn't some mass divergence point where Hiccup could have turned to evil. And I don't know if this is something that I read about online by just some regular Joe as an analysis, or whether this is actually the perspective of the creators. Either way, that opinion's wrong. I just don't see it. I also used to say that I believed he was just a lame carbon copy of Drago, and I don't think that's true on Rewatch. They have different goals, and ultimately they're just both two evil guys that have a thing for dragons. You're gonna come across that in your antagonist in a franchise that's about dragons, honestly. However, I will say that he's not nearly as fleshed out or has the same threat level as Drago. And in your final installment, you need him to feel that way. The dude is barely present in the movie until the end. Oh no, I burned down your house and one of your teammates was stupid enough not to leave my dungeon, so I kept her captive. Pfft, really scary. Especially compared to Mr. I killed all of these Vikings and I just killed your dad and I've taken your dragon and all the others and you're utterly helpless against me. Yes, Grimmel does take Toothless, and there's that epic moment where they're fighting for life as they fall into the sea before the Light Fury saves him, but it's not the same level of imposing as Drago, and it's just bothersome to me. Then my final big critique is of the Light Fury romance. I don't actually have a problem with it per se. I'm not some incel that's like, oh my god, how can they separate the best boys? That's just nonsense. I do think it was a big mistake to make her so unlikable. She needed to get along with Hiccup. It wasn't enough that she saved his life at the end. It's so wild to me that Hiccup can tame pretty much every dragon except for this one. And you can't even use the excuse that she was held captive by dragon warlords. So were countless other dragons that he saved. Yet all of them immediately accept Hiccup. This dragon just felt unlikable. I think you definitely could have kept the separation of Hiccup and Toothless without making her so angsty towards him. I think it was a mistake by the story writers. You didn't have to make Toothless the middleman, which they doubled down on in the Christmas special. You just had to make it so Toothless and the other dragons wouldn't be safe so exposed, and that's why they needed to go to the hidden world. You could have had the other wild dragons that lived there and had never been exposed to humans as volatile, and that's why they can't move all the Vikings there. Here, it just makes you not want Toothless and Hiccup to be apart because she doesn't seem very nice. She was already judgmental as hell of Toothless in the courtship. Having her hate Hiccup too was a bit too much in my eyes. They needed to change her personality completely, and just left the fans feeling rather bitter, I think. I would also like to say that despite listing positives earlier in the video, I don't feel as though some of them were as fleshed out as they could or should have been. For example, the comfort and safety of living with dragons making the Vikings soft and not cohesive as a unit should have been explored far more. If you're going to start a story like that, you need to follow through with it. You can't just use it as a gag. Same with Hiccup and his feelings of inadequacy. They do it a lot better than the team storyline, but it could have used a touch more attention. It kind of comes in a little too late and is way too subtle in the beginning. I think if you made it more obvious earlier on, would have been much better. These in particular, however, are minimal critiques and don't merit too much thought. I don't think it's all that noticeable. I just think that when you make your main villain not as good as your first and the romantic interest unlikable, everything else gets a bit exposed and you need to lift with other storylines that could have used some work. Overall, I actually really liked it on a rewatch, but I still think it's the weakest of the three, but it is a lot stronger in retrospect, and I think the fandom at large is perhaps a bit too harsh on it. I think a lot of that stems from childhood salt at Toothless and Hiccup being separated, and if you've gotten this far and feel this way, I think you should definitely give it another chance. It's not as polished as the first two, but it's perfectly enjoyable, and it ends really well. That being said though, these are all just my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the Hidden World? Do you like it? Hate it? Will you give it another chance? Have I changed your mind on it? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.